Okay, let's take a look at this. Today we're learning 2.4, simplifying rational expressions. So the first thing to simplify rational expressions, there's 3 steps. The first thing would be factor the numerator and denominator fully. So the first thing you're going to do is always factor fully first. Number 2 is something new, is state restrictions. I'll explain that a little bit later on, but it says state restrictions or the values of x that make the denominator 0. So I'll explain that in a bit. And then divide by canceling out common factors. So I just want to bring up a little thing here. Let's say you had something that looked like this. 5 times 6 all over 4 times 6. Okay? And you also had something that looks like this. 5 plus 6 all over 4 plus 6. Now, if we take a look at something like this, well, we could actually add these things if we wish, but can you cancel these things out? And the answer is actually no, you cannot do that. Remember, bedmass is multiplication, division you could do at the same time, but addition and division you have to do it in separate order. In this case, it's asking you specifically to add the top together. It's like having brackets there, so figure out the numerator first. If there's a plus sign in the middle, figure out the numerator first, which is 11, divided by, figure out the denominator second, which is 10. 11 tenths is the correct answer. If you did it this way, where you canceled out the 6, you would end up with 5 quarters, which is absolutely wrong. Okay? Now, on the other hand, if you have something that looks like this, where it's all multiplication and division at the same time, this actually works out you can do it 2 different ways. See, if you do 5 times 6 is 30, and if you do 4 times 6, it is 24. And then you could reduce that fraction on your calculator, or both are divisible by 6, so you end up with 5 over 4. So that's one way, but you could have, instead of doing that, figuring out the top and bottom, since it is all multiplication at the top and division at the same time, you could actually cancel out these 2 factors. Those are the exact same 2 factors. As long as it is all multiplication and division, cancel them out and you're just left with 5 over 4. So that's just a little highlight for what we're going to do right here. Now, of course, you have to be an expert at factoring in order to do these questions, so you have to make sure you're good with factoring. So let's take a look at question A. It says simplify. Whenever it asks to simplify this, let's remember the 3 steps. First step is factor everything. So the top I can actually factor. The bottom I can't factor, it's just 6x. It's done. But the top I can factor. I could actually factor out a 6x from everything over there. If I factor out a 6x from all 3 terms, this divided by 6x is 4x squared. This divided by 6x is just positive x, and this divided by 6x is positive 2. Okay? And so I'm just left with 6x times that, and I'm just left with 6x on the bottom. Now, step 2. State restrictions. So if I state restrictions, what are restrictions? Again, restrictions, it says up there, it is the values of x, or the variable that makes the denominator 0. You can never have 0 on the bottom of a fraction. You could have 0 on the top of the fraction, something like this, $0 divided by 9 people, everyone gets $0, okay? If you do that on your calculator, it'll just tell you 0. But if you had 9 people, sorry, $9 divided by 0 people, so you have $9 in a room, and you're dividing it by 0 people, well, how much money does each person get? Well, there aren't any people, so how can you divide by 0? You can't divide by 0, it's just undefined. So 9 divided by 0 will actually say error in your calculator. It's actually a number so big that you can't calculate it. So let's just leave it at that for now. So what makes the bottom 0? If a 0 is on the bottom, it makes the question impossible to do. So that is what restrictions are. The bottom of a fraction can never be 0. So after you factor everything, the factors any factors cannot be 0. So this 6x cannot equal 0. That will make the whole question impossible to do. You can't have a 0 there. And that just means if I divide both sides by 6, that just means x cannot equal 0. So x cannot equal 0, or else this whole question is messed up. I can't do it because it'll be 6 times 0 on the bottom, and it'll be 0. You can't have something divided by 0. It's okay for the top to be 0, just not okay for the bottom to be 0. So we just look at the bottoms, the numerators, sorry, the denominators. And then step 3, so this is done. Step 3 asks us to cancel out or divide out any common factors. Now that this is all multiplication, this bracket times this bracket divided by that bracket, I can cancel out like terms. That divided by that is gone, and what's left is 4x squared plus x plus 2. And this is the simplified version of that, except there is a restriction. X cannot equal 0. Okay? So we're going to try another one here. Again, they're going to get more complicated as we go on. Let's take a look at this one. Again, step 1 asks us, it says to simplify. Step 1 is factor both top and bottom. The top is factored already. The bottom, on the other hand, I can factor out a 2x from the bottom. If I factor out a 2x, this divided by 2x is just x. This divided by 2x is negative 2. Okay, so I end up with actually 2 times x minus 2. And on the top, I just end up with x. I'm going to put brackets around these things just so you can see it a little nicer. Then I'm going to state restrictions. Now, stating restrictions again, the bottom of the fraction, any of the factors on the bottom of the fraction cannot equal 0. So that includes any of these brackets. The 2. Well, 2 is a number. 2 is a 2, so that's not 0. But x, that x in there, x cannot equal 0. Because if x is 0, that will make this whole bottom 0. It'll be 2 times 0 times, who cares what's in here? As soon as you have a multiplication with a 0, that makes the whole thing 0. So no good. You cannot have x equals 0 because that will make this question undefined. It is undefined at x equals 0. Also, x minus 2, that second bracket, that also cannot equal 0. That means x cannot equal, bringing that over, positive 2. If x is positive 2, this will be 2 minus 2 in this bracket, which will make this 0. 0 times, okay, 2 times another 2, it'll make the whole thing 0. That's no good either. It is undefined when x is equal to 2 as well. And you'll see next year when you go to graph these things, once you simplify them, you'll understand that there'll be holes in your parabola or whatever you're graphing. There'll be holes in those specific areas because x cannot equal 0 means that it's undefined exactly at x equals 0. It's undefined when x is equal to 2. Anyways, continuing on, now I can factor out or cancel out any like terms. And in this case, this is all multiplication on the top and the bottom. So x divided by x is just, I'll have to write the 1 up top. You can't write 0, it's 1, x divided by itself. So 1 is left at the top, and on the bottom is just 2 times x minus 2. And this is the final answer, the most simplified version of that. Now these two are pretty basic, so these are just common factors. But then you're going to start getting into a little more complicated ones, like this one here, question C. This one, you may not think is complicated. It's not very complicated as long as you know where to start. Again, it asks you to simplify. Now the problem with this is, if you try to simplify immediately, you may see that something's a little fishy, something's a little wrong. Let's factor the bottom. The bottom's written in the correct order, by the way. The top is not. The top should be written as 2x plus 3, so that is correct order. That's always the correct order we write things in. On the bottom, I can factor out a 2. And if I factor out a 2, that divided by 2 is 2x, and that divided by 2 is negative 3. Now, okay, that kind of looks like the top, but it's not exactly the top. Now, what do? Well, now that I've written that in the correct manner, some of you may see it already. On the top, actually, I should leave the bottom alone, the 2x minus 3. On the top, I should actually factor out a negative. Because if I factor out a negative 1, that divided by negative 1 is 2x, and that divided by negative 1 is negative 3. That's actually going to end up being really nice for us. Now, I'm not going to cancel things out yet. I have to state restrictions. So remember, restrictions are only the bottom factors cannot equal 0. Tops are okay. So this bracket, this factor can't equal 0. It's to 2, so that's okay. This 2x minus 3, that cannot equal 0. Well, if that can't equal 0, that means 2x cannot equal, bring this over, positive 3. And then if I divide by 2 from both sides, I get x cannot equal 1.5, or 3 halves. Okay, so it is undefined at x equals 3 halves. Okay, so that's the only restriction. Then cancel things out. Well, I can cancel out brackets that are exactly the same. 2x minus 3 divided by 2x minus 3. And so I will be left with negative a half. And that is the most simplified form of that problem there. Except the restriction is 1.5 or 3 halves. Last